But first, every Australian deserves a dignified death, and that's why we all need to be concerned about the standards of care in homes for the elderly. No one should die alone and ignored on a bedroom floor in a home where just 2 staff were left to care for 45 frail elderly residents. A coronial inquest into one such death in New South Wales has raised disturbing questions about the level of care in homes around Australia and has left one grieving family still waiting for answers. Regional reporter Sally Sarah has the story.
Happy birthday to you.
Martha McKee was known by her nickname Bub. She was treasured by her family. Her 91st birthday party was another milestone in a long and contented life.
They were happy times. She just loved that birthday party outside, and yeah, it was, I'll never forget that.
It was the 25th of July 2010, the last time Martha McKee's family would see her alive.
And I actually got to say a few times that I loved her very, very much, and that she meant the world to me.
Martha McKee was a high care resident at the Mid-Richmond Aged Care Facility at Coraki in northern New South Wales. She had dementia and very little mobility.
You're trusting, you're putting your loved ones in a place. You're trusting that they will get the best of care.
There were 2 staff on duty on Mrs McKee's final night. Judith Robson, an experienced carer whose registration as an enrolled nurse had lapsed, and Patricia Sawtell, a 20-year-old who was on her first night shift as a cleaner. As the coroner would later find, Ms Robson was effectively on her own caring for 45 residents. The carers checked on Martha McKee at 2:50 a.m. She had bed poles on her bed to help pull herself up, even though she was unable to use them. The pair returned at 5 a.m. They opened the door to find Martha McKee lying on the floor. She'd fallen out of bed, taking her mattress with her. Her neck was trapped by the bed pole. Judith Robson later told police,
"I saw Martha and she was waxwork white. I turned the light on and it was absolutely horrific. I could tell that she was dead."
But Judith Robson didn't check for any signs of life. She and Patricia Sawtell closed the door and telephoned their supervisor.
Mum might have been alive, and they could not go in there and check for the signs of life and take the bedstick off her neck.
Mrs McKee was left lying on the floor for another hour before a nurse checked if she was dead.
So I'll always wonder if something could have been done. If she was alive, something could have been done to save her life.
The coroner would later find it was unclear exactly what time Mrs McKee died.
What I can say is that had she still been alive, she may have been able to have been resuscitated.
Police were called and the room was sealed off. Judy Keepance was allowed in. She said goodbye to her mother and promised to find out what happened.
Just told her I loved her. And sorted out I will.
These are the last photos that you have of her?
Yeah.
Martha McKee's family demanded answers during the coronial inquest. They wanted to know why bed poles had been fitted to Mrs McKee's bed.
She couldn't do anything for herself physically, and they shouldn't have been on the bed.
730 has obtained a Department of Health and Ageing advisory issued 6 weeks before Mrs McKee's death. It revealed that an elderly woman in South Australia had died when her neck became trapped between a bed pole and her bed. It was the same kind of bed pole which killed Martha McKee. The coroner found that in relation to the bed pole,
BCS were found to have been in breach of their responsibilities under the Aged Care Act.
Baptist Community Services says the bulletin didn't prohibit the use of bed poles.
A risk assessment was conducted on Mrs McKee's use of the KA 524 bed pole. It was determined that this was an appropriate aid for her to continue to utilise.
This case has also raised serious concerns about safe staffing levels, especially in rural and regional Australia. The Nurses Union says any shortfall can be dangerous.
Well, clearly it does place residents at risk. You've got to get the staffing right, you've got to get the skills and the qualifications of the staff right to be able to try and match the care needs.
Mid-Richmond was classified as a low-care facility. As a result, its managers weren't required to have a registered nurse on duty. But the coroner found that at the time of Mrs McKee's death, around 20 of the 45 residents were in fact high care. It's a loophole known as ageing in place. Elderly residents are allowed to stay in the same facility even as they grow older and their care needs increase. But the facility isn't required to put on more staff.
There's a gap in the aged care legislation which overlooks this problem where you can be a low care facility but still have up to 50% or more of your residents who are actually requiring and classified as being high care.
And unlike childcare, there are no minimum staffing ratios for aged care.
In fact, they're just as vulnerable as very young children who have been not so long born, and yet we don't seem to provide the care and attention at the end of life that we do at the very start of life.
The coroner expressed concerns about the staffing levels even though they were legal.
One carer to the 45 residents at Mid-Richmond, as it was in July 2010, is unsatisfactory even if it meets the legislative requirements.
The owner of the facility, Baptist Community Services, declined to be interviewed but released a statement.
Based on our extensive experience operating aged care facilities, we maintain that our staffing at Coracai on the night in question was appropriate. We also support our staff members who were involved during the events surrounding Mrs McKee's tragic death.
People in aged care homes have the right to care, protection, to have their say, all the sorts of things that the rest of us take for granted.
Martha McKee's family wants her to be remembered as much loved and valued. They don't want another family to experience a similar loss.
It's very important I tell people out there that she's not a number, she's my mum. And we miss her. I miss her very much.
Sally Sarah there and Leslie Robinson produced that report.